Hello and welcome. I'm Austin Koblarczyk, arranger and composer, bringing you episode 16 of my book review series. Today we'll be discussing Igor Stravinsky's Poetics of Music in the form of 6 lessons. Now, Igor Stravinsky, in terms of composers, probably needs very little introduction. One of the most famous composers of the 20th century, he studied under Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov until Rimsky-Korsakov's death in 1908. He wrote some of the most famous ballets in the world in The Firebird, Petrushka, and The Rite of Spring. Other famous works include L'Histoire du Soldat, The Soldier's Tale, and his Requiem Canticles. And he was a famous and in-demand conductor in the latter half of his life as well. His book Poetics of Music in the form of 6 lessons, better known as just Poetics of Music, stems from 6 lessons commissioned by Harvard in 1939 through 1940, which this was then translated into English in 1947. The book itself is split up into 6 chapters and an epilogue. Each chapter was a lesson Stravinsky gave while he occupied the Charles Eliot Norton Chair of Poetics. The chapters are titled as follows: Getting Acquainted, The Phenomenon of Music, The Composition of Music, Musical Typology, The Avatars of Russian Music, and The Performance of Music. And of course, just epilogue. Each chapter has a specialized focus, which is mostly clear from the titles. But Stravinsky really takes the time to focus in during each of these, discussing a variety of things in between them. The first chapter, Getting Acquainted, is mostly about just that. It's an introduction to the course as well as the lessons, and spends a fair bit of time solidifying important definitions that Stravinsky will be working with. The second chapter, The Phenomenon of Music, discusses how Stravinsky views music, kind of as this strange but wonderful mixture of reason and intent, and how unique it is among all the arts, being something that can only ever be experienced in conjunction with the passing of time, and requires time to pass to be experienced. It's a fascinating talk, to be quite honest. The Composition of Music, the third chapter, discusses composition not in an approach where he discusses the technicality of it. He waxes poetic, fittingly, about the concept of composition as a process, something that's very self-directed and free, for the most part. He also includes the first of several incredible disses against music critics, which I wholeheartedly enjoyed. Music typology is probably the chapter I emphasize the most with. Here Stravinsky tries to differentiate between different types of composing, between an academic style and basically everything else. This chapter is also one that rips into music critics very heavily, with a number of wonderful quotes, including my favorite. Therefore, since criticism is an art, it itself cannot escape our criticism. Chapter 5, The Avatars of Russian Music, is devoted to discussing Russian music up until that time, which includes a rather scathing segment about the Soviet Union and the propaganda machine that was, at the time, interfering with its music. The final chapter, Music Performance, The Performance of Music, is home to a fascinating discussion that I really enjoyed. Stravinsky introduces this concept of interpretation versus execution, which is how he distinguishes between the different types of performers. He considers this execution style of performance to be the more pure one, a style that is more true to the composer's intent and less willing to take as much as they'll get, where the interpretation camp is one that is very heavily willing to take liberties with their performances. He gives the example of early prima donnas and instrumental soloists, as well as a number of conductors that he was not very fond of. All in all, it's a rather quick read. In my opinion, for such a short book, Stravinsky really has packed a number of fascinating discussions into these pages. Each chapter kept me captivated in what he was saying, and I agreed with many of his statements. I found myself thoroughly enjoying this book as I read it. I would say this would be a delightful read for not only any composer, but anyone who enjoys these type of discussions on the nature of music and the nature of performance as a whole. Now, if you've read the book or are planning on it, I'd like to hear your opinion in the comment section. I found this book incredibly interesting and loved the discussions of it. And if you did as well, or find the topics interesting to discuss, I may come back to them at a later date to weigh in, as well as give my own opinion on each of the topics. So feel free to do the YouTube things like and subscribe and all that if you want to see that later. And if you've enjoyed the review, I have 15 other ones now on the channel alongside this one. So feel free to check those out if any might interest you. I know this was a rather shorter one, but like I said, rather short book. And that's all. So thanks. I'll see you next time.